Hello there, and welcome to the Forgotten Deep. Now let us begin. The reason why scientists still won't explore the 1,600-meter Lake Baikal abyss. Deep in the heart of Siberia, where the Earth is frozen for 9 months of the year, there is a wound in the crust of our planet. It is a crescent-shaped abyss so deep, so vast, and so ancient that it defies every rule of limnology we have ever written. This is Lake Baikal. But to call it a lake is a fundamental misunderstanding of what lies beneath its glass-like surface. Imagine, if you will, a body of water so deep that you could stack the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building on Earth, on top of itself twice, and the tip of the second spire would still be hundreds of meters beneath the waves. Imagine a basin so massive that it holds 20% of the world's liquid freshwater. If every human on Earth drank only from this lake, we would not deplete it for thousands of years. But as you look down through its impossibly clear ice so transparent, you can see 40 meters into the blue-black void. You start to realize why the locals don't call it a lake. They call it the sacred sea, and they speak of it with a tone of voice usually reserved for gods or monsters. Scientists have spent decades trying to map its floor, yet every expedition returns with more questions than answers. Why does the water here contain more oxygen than it should at such crushing depths? Why do creatures here grow to sizes that should be biologically impossible in freshwater? And most importantly, what happened in 1982 when Soviet divers encountered something at 50 meters that forced the military to classify the entire region for decades? Tonight, we are descending. We are leaving the world of sunlight and oxygen behind. We are traveling to the bottom of the 1,600-meter abyss to find out why, despite our modern technology, there are parts of Lake Baikal that scientists still refuse to explore. Close your eyes. Let the pressure of the deep settle around you. We are going down. Chapter 1. The Rift. A gash in the world part before we can truly understand the secrets of the abyss. We must confront the scale of the stage upon which this mystery is set. To the modern world, Lake Baikal is a coordinate on a map, a blue crescent tucked away in the Siberian wilderness. But to those who stand on its shores in the dead of winter, it is something else entirely. It is an entrance. Imagine standing on the surface of the lake in mid-February. The air temperature has dropped to minus 40 degrees. The wind, a biting Siberian gale known as the Sarma, screams down from the mountains, stripping the snow from the ice until the surface is as smooth and dark as a polished obsidian mirror. You look down. Usually, when we look at a lake, we see a reflection of the sky. But Baikal's water is so pure, so devoid of the suspended minerals and pollutants that plague the rest of the world's waterways, that the mirror is transparent. You are not looking at ice. You feel as though you are standing on a void. You can see 40 meters, over 130 feet, straight down into the blue-black heart of the water. You see the massive boulders on the submerged shelves. You see the ghostly, pale forms of fish darting through the shadows. And then, the shelf ends. The light fades from turquoise to a bruised indigo, and then to a blackness so absolute it feels like it has weight. This is the beginning of the rift. You are standing on a thin sheet of frozen water, separated from a mile-deep plunge by only a few feet of ice. It is a sensation that triggers an ancient, primal fear, the fear of the big dark. This is not just water. It is a geological event that has been unfolding for 25 million years. The opening of the Earth. Most lakes are temporary. In the eyes of the Earth, a lake is a fleeting thing, a dent in the ground filled by a melting glacier or a redirected river. Within 10 or 20,000 years, they fill with silt, they become marshes, and eventually, they vanish, leaving behind nothing but a fertile plain. This is the fate of the Great Lakes of North America. It is the fate of the lakes of Europe. But Baikal defies the cycle of death. It is what geologists call a rift lake. Deep beneath the silt of the lake floor, the very foundation of the continent is in agony. Here, the Eurasian plate and the Amur plate are locked in a slow-motion divorce. They are pulling apart at a rate of about 2 centimeters per year. To a human, 2 centimeters is the width of a finger. To a planet, it is a catastrophic tearing of the skin. Because the Earth is pulling apart here, the floor of the lake never has the chance to fill with silt and die. As the sediment settles, the floor simply drops lower. The rift widens. The abyss deepens. If this process continues, and there is no geological evidence to suggest it won't, Baikal will eventually tear the Asian continent in half. Millions of years from now, this lake will become the world's fifth ocean, a vast saltwater sea dividing the landmass. When you look into the abyss, you are looking at the birth of an ocean. You are looking at a wound in the earth that refuses to heal. The heavy water, there is a specific quality to the water of Baikal that contributes to its mystery, a chemical signature found nowhere else. It is active water. In most deep lakes, the water is stratified. The top layer is warm and full of oxygen. The bottom layer is cold, stagnant, and anoxic, meaning it is dead. In a typical deep lake, if you were to sink to the bottom, you would find a graveyard where nothing decomposes because there is no oxygen for the bacteria that cause decay. But Baikal is a living machine. Through a complex dance of thermal vents at the bottom and the extreme cooling of the surface, the lake performs a total turnover every year. The oxygen-rich water from the surface is dragged down into the darkness, while the nutrient-heavy water from the floor is pushed upward. This means that at 1,600 meters, at a depth where the pressure would flatten a submarine, there is enough oxygen to support complex life. This is why the abyss is not a desert. It is a jungle, but this oxygen comes at a price. The water is incredibly rich in minerals, particularly silicon, which the lake's unique inhabitants use to build their bodies. There is a tiny crustacean here, the Episcura baikalensis. It is no larger than a grain of salt, but there are trillions of them. They act as the lake's biological filtration system. They consume the algae, the bacteria, and the organic debris. They are the reason the water is so clear. But for a diver or a scientist in a submersible, this clarity is a psychological trap. In the Baikal abyss, you lose your sense of scale. Without the murk of normal water to provide a sense of distance, a giant underwater cliff might look like it's 10 feet away when it is actually a mile wide. Pilots have reported a sense of vertigo so intense they had to close their eyes to avoid vomiting. It is like flying through a vacuum. And as you descend further, the vacuum begins to talk to you. The singing ice and the subsurface moan. If you were to stay on that ice mirror as the sun begins to set, you would hear the voice of the lake. The locals call it the singing. As the temperature shifts, the ice, which can be up to 2 meters thick, expands and contracts. Because the lake is so vast, the pressure of this movement creates cracks that can be miles long. The sound is not a crack like a breaking glass. It is a deep, resonant boom that sounds like heavy artillery. It vibrates through your boots, through your bones, and into your very soul. But beneath the booming of the ice, there is a lower frequency, a rhythmic, pulsing moan that has been recorded by hydrophones placed deep in the rift. Some scientists claim it is the sound of gas hydrates, methane trapped in the sediment, escaping in massive bubbles. Others suggest it is the sound of the tectonic plates themselves, the tectonic grinding of the world's crust. But the Buriat people, the indigenous inhabitants who have lived on these shores for millennia, have a different explanation. They speak of the Abiakatan, the mother of the water, whose breathing moves the tides of the lake. They believe the lake is a sentient entity, a colossal liquid brain that is aware of everything that touches its surface. And as the sun disappears and the ice turns from transparent to a void-like black, you realize that the Buriats might be right. The lake doesn't feel like a geographic feature. It feels like a presence. The 7-kilometer grave, we must talk about the floor. Or rather, the true floor. If you were to take a professional sonar rig to the center of the lake, it would tell you the depth is 1,642 meters. This is the point where the water ends. But for a geologist, this is just the beginning of the story. Beneath that water is a layer of sediment so deep it boggles the mind. 7 kilometers of silt. To put that in perspective, the Grand Canyon is only 1.8 kilometers deep. You could fit nearly 4 Grand Canyons, stacked one on top of the other, inside the mud at the bottom of Lake Baikal. Why is this important? Because this sediment has never been scoured away by glaciers. For 25 million years, everything that has ever lived and died in this region has left a record in that mud. It is the world's most complete library of evolution. Within those 7 kilometers of silt are the remains of creatures that shouldn't exist. There are pollens from tropical plants that grew here when Siberia was a jungle. There are the bones of unknown mammals that fell into the rift when the Earth first opened. But there is a reason we haven't reached the bottom of that library. The pressure at the bottom of the water is 160 atmospheres. The pressure at the bottom of the sediment is incalculable. It creates a physical barrier that our current drilling technology simply cannot penetrate. Scientists believe that at the very bottom of that 7 kilometer pile, the heat from the Earth's core is so intense that the water isn't liquid. It's a supercritical fluid, a state of matter that is neither liquid nor gas. We are not just looking at a lake. We are looking at a pressurized chamber where the rules of chemistry begin to break down. We are looking at a place where the past isn't just buried. It's being cooked under the weight of a world. The rings of the abyss, while the depth of the water is a vertical mystery, Baikal presents puzzles that are so large they can only be perceived from the heavens. In 1999, and again more prominently in 2009, astronauts aboard the International Space Station looked down at the frozen white expanse of Siberia and saw something that stopped them in their tracks. There, etched into the ice of the world's deepest lake, were perfect, geometric circles. These were not small patches of melted snow. These were colossal rings, nearly 5 kilometers in diameter. They appeared in the middle of the lake, far from the warmth of the shoreline, in areas where the ice should be at its thickest and most stable. To the naked eye on the surface, they are invisible. The scale is too vast for a human to perceive. But from 400 kilometers up, they look like giant, dark eyes staring out from the skull of the Earth. For years, the Baikal rings were the subject of feverish speculation. Were they the result of secret military testing? Or perhaps the landing marks of something descending from the stars? The scientific explanation is perhaps even more unsettling. These rings are believed to be the result of massive methane burps from the 7 kilometer sediment graveyard we discussed earlier. Deep beneath the floor, tectonic shifts crack the prehistoric reservoirs of methane gas. This gas, under immense pressure, screams upward through the water column. As it rises, it creates a massive, swirling convection current, a warm vortex that spins like a submerged cyclone. This spinning column of relatively warm water eats away at the bottom of the ice, thinning it until the dark water beneath begins to show through, creating a perfect circle of fragile, deadly ice. But here is what scientists cannot explain. Why do they only appear in certain years? And why are they so mathematically perfect? In a lake as chaotic and turbulent as Baikal, the existence of a perfect geometric shape suggests a level of precision in the Earth's geological plumbing that we simply don't understand. When you fly over the lake and see those rings, you aren't just looking at ice. You are looking at the breath of the abyss, a warning from the deep that the floor is alive and it is exhaling. The Devil's Crater and the Black Water, if the rings are a warning, the Polynius are the trap. In the dead of winter, when the ice is 3 feet thick and trucks are driving across the lake as if it were a paved highway, there are patches of Baikal that refuse to freeze. These are known as the Devil's Craters, spots of open, ink-black water that steam in the -40-degree air. Local legends say these are windows to hell, spots where the lake's spirit comes up for air. Scientists have a more technical term, hydrothermal plumes. We often think of the bottom of a lake as a cold, stagnant place, but Baikal is fueled by the fires of the Earth's mantle. In 1990, a deep-sea probe discovered a series of hydrothermal vents in the Frolica Bay area of the lake. These are underwater volcanoes, spewing mineral-rich water at temperatures far above the boiling point. Because of the extreme pressure at 1,600 meters, this water doesn't turn to steam. It remains a superheated liquid, rising in a thermal ghost through the cold layers above. When these plumes hit the surface, they create the black water. For the researchers who have attempted to study these vents, the experience is harrowing. To hover a submersible over a hydrothermal vent in the Baikal abyss is to dance on the edge of a blowtorch. The temperature fluctuations are so violent they can warp the external sensors of a multi-million-dollar craft. And then there is the light. Several pilots of the Mir submersibles reported seeing a faint, ghostly glow emanating from these vents. a bioluminescent haze that shouldn't exist in freshwater. It wasn't the glow of fire, but the glow of life. Bacteria, and perhaps things much larger than bacteria, huddling around the warmth of the Earth's core, thriving in a world that hasn't seen a photon of sunlight in 10 million years. The Mir expeditions, touching the bottom to truly understand why scientists won't explore certain parts of this lake. We have to look at the stories of those who tried. In 2008, the Russian Academy of Sciences launched the Mir at Baikal expedition. They used the same legendary submersibles that were used to film the wreck of the Titanic. These are the apex of human deep-sea engineering, titanium spheres built to withstand the weight of an ocean. Anatoly Sagalevich, one of the world's most experienced deep-sea pilots, described the descent into the Baikal Rift as one of the most alien experiences of his life. As they dropped past the 1,000-meter mark, the snow began. In the deep ocean, marine snow is the constant fall of organic debris from the surface. But in Baikal, the snow is different. It is thick, heavy, and seemingly purposeful. The pilots described visibility dropping to zero as they were engulfed in a blizzard of white organic matter, detritus that seemed to be pulsing with its own internal rhythm. When they finally touched the bottom, the sonar began to malfunction. They were in the heart of the rift, 1,600 meters down. The lights of the Mir cut through the darkness, revealing a floor that looked like the surface of the moon, cracked, gray, and littered with strange, chimney-like structures. But as they attempted to take sediment samples, the submersibles were buffeted by underwater winds, currents so powerful they threatened to pin the titanium spheres against the jagged canyon walls. These currents shouldn't exist. There are no tides in a lake. There are no lunar poles powerful enough to move water with that kind of force at that depth. The pilots reported a sensation of being watched by the walls of the rift. In the silence of the abyss, the only sound was the creaking of the titanium as the pressure squeezed the sub. It is a sound that stays with a person. It is the sound of the abyss telling you that you are a trespasser. After 3 years of expeditions, the Mir program was halted. While the official reasons were financial, the rumors among the scientific community in Irkutsk were different. They whispered that the deeper the submersibles went, the more anomalies they encountered, not just geological, but biological and magnetic. They found areas where the magnetic field was so distorted it caused time slips in the digital clocks of the submersibles, discrepancies of several minutes that couldn't be explained by equipment failure. The wall of fear, why don't we go back? Why? In an age of SpaceX and Mars rovers, is the bottom of a lake in Siberia still off-limits? The answer is a combination of physics and psychology. Physically, the Baikal Abyss is more hostile than outer space. If a seal on a spacecraft fails, you have seconds to breathe. If a seal on a deep-sea submersible fails, the pressure is so instantaneous that the human body doesn't even have time to register pain. You simply cease to be a solid and become a liquid. But psychologically, there is the wall of fear. The researchers who spend their lives on the shores of Baikal develop a deep respect, almost a religious dread, for the lake. They see the way the water behaves. They see the way it claims those who are too arrogant. Every year, the lake takes dozens of lives. Fishermen who fall through the invisible ice, divers who disappear in the deep rifts, and ships that vanish in sudden, localized storms that appear out of a clear blue sky. Scientists are rational people. But when you are sitting in a titanium ball, 1,600 meters below the surface, and your sonar picks up a 20-meter-long shape moving with intelligent speed toward your craft, rationality begins to fail. When you see a perfect 5-kilometer ring in the ice that appeared overnight without a sound, you begin to wonder if some mysteries are better left in the dark. The rift of Lake Baikal is not just a hole in the ground. It is a gateway to an older version of Earth, a version where the water is heavy, the air is methane, and the masters of the domain don't walk on 2 legs. Scientists haven't stopped exploring Baikal because they've found everything. They've stopped because they realized that the deeper they go, the less the rules of our world seem to apply. And in the abyss, when the rules break, you don't come home. Chapter 2. The Biological Anomaly. Life in the pressure cooker. We have felt the weight of the water. We have understood the violent architecture of the rift. Now, we must look at the inhabitants of this alien world. In the deep oceans, the Atlantic, the Pacific, life is a game of scarcity. Food falls from above like rare, tiny crumbs from a table miles away. But in the abyss of Lake Baikal, the rules are different. Because the lake breathes, pulling oxygen down into its deepest veins, it has created a biological pressure cooker. Here, evolution has been trapped in a closed loop for 25 million years. If the Earth is a library, Baikal is the locked room in the basement where the most ancient, most bizarre manuscripts are kept. Over 80% of the species living in these depths are endemic, meaning they exist here and nowhere else on the face of the planet. They are the orphans of time, the ghost of the deep, the Gallimianca. As we descend into the lightless zone, past the 500-meter mark, we encounter the most significant inhabitant of the Baikal abyss. It is a creature that seems to be made of moonlight and shadow. This is the Gallimianca, or the Baikal oilfish. At first glance, the Gallimianca looks fragile, almost unfinished. It has no scales. Its body is translucent, a pale, ghostly white that allows you to see the delicate lattice of its skeleton and the slow, rhythmic pulsing of its heart. But do not let its appearance fool you. This fish is a master of the extreme. Most fish have a swim bladder, a gas-filled organ that allows them to stay buoyant. But at 1,000 meters, a gas bladder is a liability. The pressure would compress the gas until the organ implodes. The Gallimianca solved this problem with oil. Nearly 35% of its body mass is pure biological oil. This oil is incompressible. It allows the fish to move from the crushing depths of the floor to the shallow waters of the surface in a single night without suffering the bends or exploding from the pressure change. It is a living, breathing elevator. But there is something haunting about the Gallimianca's biology. If you were to bring one to the surface and leave it in the sun, it would not rot in the traditional sense. It would simply melt. Because its body is so heavily composed of fat and oil, the warmth of the sun turns it into a puddle of liquid, leaving behind nothing but a delicate, white skeleton. The locals tell stories of the golden oil of Baikal. After great storms, thousands of these fish are sometimes washed onto the shore, where their bodies melt under the Siberian sun, coating the rocks in a layer of clear, medicinal oil. Scientists watch the Gallimianca with a mix of awe and frustration. It shouldn't be able to thrive in such a high-oxygen environment while remaining so primitive. It is a fish that reproduces not by laying eggs, but by giving birth to live young. Thousands of tiny, transparent larvae expelled into the freezing dark. This is a strategy usually reserved for the warm-blooded mammals of the surface. Yet here it is, happening a mile beneath the ice. The Gallimianca is the primary food source for almost everything in the lake. It is the fuel that keeps the abyss running. But it is not the most terrifying thing in the water. The scavengers, abyssal gigantism. In the biology of the deep, there is a phenomenon that haunts the dreams of marine biologists: abyssal gigantism. For reasons we are still trying to map, certain species, when placed under extreme pressure and high oxygen, grow to sizes that defy their genetic blueprints. In the Pacific, this gives us the giant isopod. In Baikal, it gives us the acanthogamorous. To a person on the surface, a scud or a shrimp is a tiny thing, something you might find under a rock in a stream, no larger than a fingernail. But at the bottom of the Baikal Rift, these creatures have evolved into armored titans. Imagine a shrimp the size of a dinner plate. Its body is covered in jagged, translucent spines, like a suit of crystal armor. Its eyes are large and pitch black, designed to catch the faintest glimmer of bioluminescence. These are the gamerids of the abyss. They are the cleanup crew of the lake. When a nerpa seal dies or a large fish falls to the floor, these giant scavengers arrive by the thousands. They move with a clicking, mechanical efficiency. In the absolute silence of the 1,600-meter floor, the sound of thousands of armored legs scuttling over the rocks creates a low-frequency vibration that can be picked up by sensitive hydrophones. Scientists who have sent down baited cameras have watched in horror and fascination as these giant amphipods strip a carcass to white bone in a matter of hours. They are the apex scavengers of a world without light. But why do they grow so large? Is it simply the oxygen, as the textbooks say? Or is there something in the 7-kilometer sediment floor, some ancient chemical or prehistoric nutrient, that acts as a growth hormone for the life above it? When you see a creature that should be a fraction of an inch long growing to nearly a foot, you begin to realize that the blueprint of life in Baikal has been altered. The lake doesn't just sustain life, it amplifies it. The impossible resident. The Baikal seal, perhaps the greatest biological mystery of the lake, is its only mammal, the Nerpa, or the Baikal seal. The Nerpa is a paradox wrapped in silver fur. It is one of only 3 freshwater seal species in the world, and the only one that is entirely unique to its location. But look at a map. Lake Baikal is in the middle of the continent. It is surrounded by thousands of miles of high mountains and dry steppes. The nearest ocean, the Arctic, is nearly 2,000 miles away. How did they get here? The prevailing scientific theory is that they traveled up the Yenisei and Angara rivers during the last ice age, when the world was a slush of melting glaciers and rising tides. But even this theory has holes. A seal is a sea creature. It requires a specific diet and environment. To travel 2,000 miles inland, through turbulent rivers and against the current, is a feat of endurance that seems impossible for a colony of mammals. Yet here they are. And in the 25 million years they have been trapped in Baikal, they have changed. The Nerpa has evolved the largest eyes of any seal in the world in proportion to its body size. These huge, dark orbs are designed to see in the near-total darkness of the deep rift. While most seals stay near the surface to hunt, the Nerpa is a deep diver. They have been recorded descending to depths of 400, 600, even 800 meters. Their blood is thick with hemoglobin, allowing them to store massive amounts of oxygen for 20-minute dives into the abyss. They are the only thing that connects the world of the sun to the world of the rift. But the indigenous Bariat people tell a different story of the Nerpa. They believe the seals are not from the ocean at all. They believe the seals were born from the lake itself, that they emerged from the deep rifts as guardians of the water. There is an unsettling intelligence in the eyes of a Nerpa. When they surface near a boat, they don't look at humans with the curiosity of a dog. They look with a steady, judging gaze, as if they know exactly what lies at the bottom of the 1,600-meter hole, and they are wondering why we are so eager to find it. The bottomless hunger, the mystery of the 7-kilometer sediment. While we can see the fish and the seals, the true biological engine of Baikal is invisible. It lies beneath the water, in that 7-kilometer layer of prehistoric mud. Recent core samples taken from the upper layers of the sediment have revealed something that has sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Extremophile bacteria that are unlike anything found in the deep-sea vents of the ocean. These bacteria do not live on sunlight. They do not even live on the minerals from the thermal vents. They live on deep carbon, methane, and ancient organic matter that has been pressurized for millions of years. Scientists call this the deep biosphere. There is more biomass, more living stuff, inside the mud of the lake floor than there is in the water above it. We are essentially floating over a 7-kilometer thick slab of living, breathing, consuming sludge. This leads to a terrifying question. If the bacteria in the mud are this specialized, and if the shrimp in the water grow to be giants, what happens when that deep, ancient DNA finds its way into a larger organism? There are parts of the Baikal floor that are dead zones where no fish will swim. The water is clear, the oxygen is high, but the area is avoided as if it were cursed. In these zones, the sonar doesn't show a flat floor. It shows biomass mounds, massive, pulsating hills of organic matter that seem to grow and shrink with the seasons. Is it possible that the master of the water dragons isn't a reptile at all? Is it possible that the monster of Baikal is a colonial organism, a massive, intelligent mound of ancient bacteria and giant amphipods working in unison? As we prepare to dive deeper into the legends of the Lusad Khan, we have to face the biological reality. In a lake this old and this deep, the word impossible has no meaning. The ancient king, the legend of Lusad Khan, when science reaches its limit, folklore usually takes over. But in Lake Baikal, the line between a fisherman's tall tale and a biological reality is dangerously thin. For centuries, the Buryat people have whispered of the Lusud Khan, the master of the water dragons. In ancient petroglyphs found on the cliffs of Sagint Zaba, archaeologists discovered carvings that date back thousands of years. They don't depict the seals or the small fish. They depict a massive, elongated creature with a head like a crocodile and a body that ripples like a serpent. For a long time, Soviet scientists dismissed these as mythological interpretations of the Baikal sturgeon, a massive fish that can live for 60 years and grow to over 2 meters in length. But a sturgeon, however large, does not explain the sonar readings from the 1990s. During a mapping expedition of the Central Basin, researchers detected a biological mass moving at a depth of 1,200 meters. The mass was estimated to be nearly 15 meters, about 50 feet, long. It moved with a rhythmic, muscular undulation that didn't match the stiff-bodied swimming of a sturgeon. Even more chillingly, it didn't flee from the sound of the research vessel. It rose toward it, shadowing the boat for several kilometers before plunging back into the 1,600-meter rift. What could survive that deep and grow that large? Some cryptozoologists suggest a relic population of plesiosaurs, but the more terrifying scientific theory is hyperoxygenated gigantism. In the deep oceans, creatures are limited by the lack of oxygen. But in Baikal, the breathing water means there is no ceiling on how much energy a creature can burn. If a sturgeon, a prehistoric fish that has remained unchanged for 200 million years, were to find its way into the high-pressure, high-oxygen boiling bottom of the rift, its growth plates might never turn off. It would become a giant, a leviathan of the dark, fueled by the endless buffet of oilfish and giant shrimp. The Lusud Khan might not be a monster from another dimension. It might simply be a fish that forgot how to stop growing. Every beautiful ecosystem has a shadow. In the crystal-clear water of Baikal, that shadow takes the form of the most sophisticated parasites on Earth. Because the lake is a closed system, parasites have evolved to be incredibly efficient. There is a species of parasitic crustacean here that does not just feed on its host, it hijacks it. This parasite targets the Gallomyanca, the translucent oilfish. It attaches itself to the fish's nervous system, slowly numbing the fish's natural instinct to hide in the dark. As the parasite grows, it forces the fish to swim toward the surface, toward the light. The fish becomes a zombie, its translucent body shimmering near the ice where it is easily spotted by the Nerpa seals or the gulls. The parasite wants the fish to be eaten. It needs to reach the warm stomach of a mammal to complete its life cycle. When you look down into that 40 meters of clear ice and see a lone fish swimming aimlessly in the bright sun, you aren't looking at a happy creature. You are looking at a biological puppet. This level of behavioral manipulation is rare in freshwater, but in the pressure cooker of Baikal, it is a daily occurrence. It serves as a grim reminder. In the abyss, your mind is just as vulnerable as your body. If you were to lower a hydrophone into the 1,600-meter abyss, you wouldn't hear silence. You would hear what sounds like a haunted factory. Water conducts sound 4 times faster than air, and in the deep rift of Baikal, the acoustics are amplified by the hard, crystalline walls of the canyon. The lake has its own voice, a mixture of tectonic grinding, methane bubbles popping, and the biological chatter of the deep. But there are sounds that defy classification. Russian hydroacousticians have recorded the metallic screech, a sound that lasts for several minutes and resembles a massive steel cable being dragged across a jagged rock. It isn't a whale song, and it isn't the sound of ice. It is a structural sound, as if the earth itself is under a tension it can barely hold. And then there are the pings. High-frequency, rhythmic pulses that occur at regular intervals in the deepest parts of the lake. Some researchers suggest these are the clicks of a yet undiscovered species of deepwater cetacean, a freshwater whale that has remained hidden in the rift. Others, more skeptically, point to the fact that these pings often increase in frequency right before a magnetic anomaly is recorded. The lake is talking, but we lack the dictionary to translate. For a diver, these sounds are psychological warfare. The feeling of a 100 decibel thump hitting your chest from a mile below is enough to cause a panic attack and even the most seasoned explorer. It is the sound of a world that is fundamentally not built for us. Why haven't these monsters spread? If the Lusudkan is so powerful or the giant shrimp so efficient, why don't they travel down the Angara River and into the world's oceans? The answer is the chemical barrier. Lake Baikal is so pure, its mineral content is so specific that its inhabitants have become chemically locked to its waters. If a Baikal shrimp were placed in a regular river, the change in salinity and pH would cause its cells to lose their integrity. They would literally fall apart. The creatures of the abyss are prisoners of their own perfection. They have evolved for 25 million years to thrive in a 1,600-meter hole in the middle of Siberia. They are the kings of a very specific, very dangerous castle. But this prison goes both ways. Scientists have attempted to introduce other species to the lake to see how they would compete. Almost all of them die within days. The water of Baikal is too thin. It lacks the dissolved salts that most organisms need to regulate their internal chemistry. The lake rejects outsiders. It is a biological fortress that keeps its own secrets in and the rest of the world out. As we leave the world of biology behind and prepare to enter the darker realms of history and military classification, we must hold on to one fact. The creatures we have discussed, the ghost fish, the giant scavengers, the ancient dragons, are the ones we know about. They are the ones that have been caught in nets or filmed by expensive submersibles. But the mere pilots and the sonar technicians all say the same thing when the cameras are turned off. The further you go into the rift, the less organic things seem to become. In the next chapter, we move away from the what and toward the who. Because in 1982, the Soviet Navy didn't find a fish. They found something that looked like us, but was 10 feet tall, wore silver suits, and could move through the crushing weight of 50-meter deep water without a single tank of oxygen. We are about to enter the most classified chapter of the Baikal mystery, the silver swimmers. Chapter 3, the 1982 incident. The silver swimmers. To understand why Lake Baikal remains a forbidden zone for so many, we must leave the realm of biology and enter the world of military archives. We must travel back to the summer of 1982. At this time, the Soviet Union was a place of absolute secrets. The Cold War was at a fever pitch, and the USSR was obsessed with the concept of asymmetric warfare, the idea that the next great battle wouldn't be fought in the skies, but in the depths of the world's oceans. Lake Baikal, with its impossible depths and isolated location, was the perfect training ground. It was here that the Soviet Navy's elite combat swimmers, the Spetsnaz of the sea, were sent to master the art of underwater survival. They were young, physically perfect men, trained to operate in conditions that would kill an average diver in minutes. But in the summer of 1982, during a routine tactical training mission at a depth of 50 meters, these elite soldiers encountered something that no amount of Soviet training could have prepared them for. They didn't find an American spy sub. They didn't find a lost shipwreck. They found the silver swimmers. The descent into the frozen dark. The mission began as a standard deep-water reconnaissance exercise. 7 divers, equipped with the most advanced Soviet underwater gear of the time, the AVS, 5 oxygen systems, plunged into the crystal-clear, freezing waters of the Central Basin. The goal was simple: test a new underwater propulsion vehicle at depths exceeding 40 meters. In the world of diving, 50 meters is a threshold. It is the danger zone where nitrogen narcosis begins to cloud the mind, where the world turns a shade of blue that feels more like outer space than Earth. The water was calm and visibility was excellent, but as the Soviet dive team reached the 50-meter mark, the lead diver signaled a halt. Floating in the void, just out of reach of their underwater lamps, were figures. At first, the commander assumed they were a rival unit, but as the figures drew closer, military logic crumbled. These were not men. According to declassified reports suppressed until the fall of the Iron Curtain, the divers described beings that stood nearly 3 meters tall. These giants were humanoid but lacked any visible scuba equipment. No tanks, no regulators, and no bubbles. They wore skin-tight, shimmering silver suits that seemed to vibrate with internal light, and their heads were encased in large, translucent spherical helmets filled with a shifting, dark haze that obscured any facial features. The silver swimmers moved with a fluid grace, defying water drag as if moving through a vacuum, without the use of fins or propulsion units. As the two groups locked in a silent standoff 150 feet below the surface, the Soviet divers reported an intense pressure in their skulls, not physical, but a mental weight accompanied by a buzzing sound. From the surface, the commander issued a panicked, paranoid order. If they aren't ours, and they aren't theirs, they are a threat. Capture one. The 7 divers formed a perimeter and attempted to close in with underwater nets and specialized harpoons. This was the moment the Baikal abyss defended itself. As the divers moved to strike, a massive, invisible wave of kinetic energy rippled through the water, a solid wall that struck with the force of a freight train. In an instant, all 7 divers were propelled upward. In diving, this is a death sentence. The rapid ascent causes nitrogen in the blood to expand into bubbles, a condition known as decompression sickness or the bends. The men were shot from 50 meters to the surface in seconds. The scene at the surface was one of carnage, as the divers' bodies curled into unnatural positions while the nitrogen tore through their tissues. The tragedy was compounded by a fatal bureaucratic failure. The ship's recompression chamber was designed for only 2 people. The medical officer desperately tried to cram 4 divers into the small tank, but the equipment failed under the strain. A valve burst, the pressure dropped instantly, and 3 of the men inside died as their lungs collapsed. The 4th was left a permanent invalid, while the 3 divers waiting on deck died of embolisms. In a single afternoon, the Soviet Navy lost its most elite unit not to an enemy, but to a warning. The Kremlin's response was immediate suppression. The mission was classified top secret, special importance. Survivors were threatened with the Gulag, and death certificates were falsified as training accidents. However, the military did not walk away. For 6 months, the area became a closed military zone. The Navy dropped depth charges into the rift to clear the abyss, but sonar technicians reported that the anomalous masses remained. In fact, the bombings seemed to trigger wild fluctuations in the magnetic field that disrupted the ship's electrical systems. The abyss simply waited them out. Eventually, the military shifted to passive observation, recording unclassifiable contacts that moved vertically rather than horizontally. These large, smooth shapes did not scatter sound. They appeared to absorb it, causing sonar signals to distort and collapse. Navigation systems failed, compasses spun, and the lake's magnetic field began pulsing rhythmically in coordination with the movements below. This was no longer a question of unknown biology. It was a confrontation with superior technology. Medical autopsies of the deceased divers revealed chilling details. The damage was strangely uneven, suggesting the ascent might have been calculated rather than random. Pathologists found clean, radial microfractures in the skulls centered around the temporal lobes, suggesting the kinetic force had interacted directly with their nervous systems. Surface crew members also reported lingering headaches, sleep paralysis, and the sensation of voices, an imposed wave of intense fear and the certainty of a vast, aware presence. Analysts later realized that the silver swimmers were not hostile until provoked. They appeared to defend a vertical domain rather than a horizontal territory. The order to capture was the pivotal mistake. The beings had merely been observing until the nets were deployed. By early winter of 1982, the anomalous contacts vanished and the lake returned to normal. The Soviet Navy issued a final standing order. No more manned dives below 40 meters in the central basin and no further provocation. Lake Baikal was no longer an unknown environment. It was considered occupied. Humanity had encountered something that did not fear it, and the abyss had delivered a single, devastating lesson. Chapter 4 Part 1. The Ghost Lights Beneath the Ice. The first reports of the ghost lights did not come from the scientific community, but from the local fishermen who worked the frozen surface of Lake Baikal. In the winters following the 1982 incident, these men began describing defined, moving sources of light. circular glows drifting slowly through the black water beneath the ice. While Baikal has no shortage of folklore, these reports were different due to their chilling consistency across various villages and years. A pale, bluish-white or green-tinged disk moving silently and deep, always disappearing the moment an observer attempted to follow it. To those on the surface, these were not creatures, they were simply the lights. Lake Baikal's winter ice acts as a unique natural window, forming thick, clear plates over a meter deep that allow one to see straight down into the abyss. Through this window, the phenomenon became impossible to ignore. By the late 1980s, entire groups of witnesses watched discrete, smooth-edged circular shapes, some estimated to be several meters across, moving without disturbing the water or creating currents. These disks appeared to possess a level of awareness, changing course to avoid cracks in the ice as if conscious of the surface above them. The first documented sighting occurred in February 1989 when a geological survey team watched a glow translate smoothly across the black void directly under their drilling platform. When the team attempted to illuminate the object with a high-powered lamp, it accelerated downward and vanished into depths estimated below 500 meters. As reports accumulated, it became clear the lights appeared almost exclusively in the Central Basin, the same region associated with the 1982 diver deaths. They appeared only during calm, clear nights, moving with an intent that suggested navigation rather than drift. They would pause, reverse, or circle observers before moving on, always remaining just out of reach. By 1991, Soviet naval intelligence reactivated passive monitoring stations to track these anomalies. This time, no divers were sent. Instead, magnetometers deployed beneath the ice recorded sharp, localized distortions and brief collapses in magnetic intensity that synchronized perfectly with the visual sightings. Enhanced observation revealed that the lights had a defined structure: a circular perimeter, a brighter outer ring, and a dimmer, pulsating core. They appeared to cycle light intensity around their rims without any visible mechanical components, exhaust, or propellers. Furthermore, sonar buoys reported dead spots, where sound waves seemed to bend away from the objects, leaving blank zones in the data. Internally, the military classified these lights as USOs, unidentified submerged objects, a technical category for contacts demonstrating technology-like structure and persistence. A rare event in January 1993 saw a ghost light ascend to within 30 meters of the surface, causing instruments to saturate and cameras to malfunction. As the light intensified, a fracture raced across the ice, spiderwebbing the surface before the disk immediately descended back into the darkness. It was a clear demonstration that the lights were aware of the boundary and respected it. The ghost lights never breached the surface or responded to human signals. They observed, moved, and withdrew. This pattern mirrored the behavior of the silver swimmers: non-hostile, non-random, and deeply controlled. By the mid-1990s, an unwritten rule emerged among researchers: if the lights appear, the experiment ends. It became understood that whatever lived beneath Lake Baikal was not hidden by human ignorance, but by its own choice. Chapter 4, Part 2. The magnetic silence light was only the symptom. The real phenomenon was invisible. Every time the ghost lights appeared beneath Lake Baikal, the lake's magnetic field changed, not subtly or gradually, but abruptly and locally, as if something were dragging space itself through the water. Magnetometer arrays deployed beneath the ice recorded collapses in field strength so sudden they resembled equipment failure, followed by a rebound where the field often returned stronger than before. The data was clear: the magnetic spikes followed the lights, not the other way around. Scientists mapping these disturbances began identifying dead zones, volumes of water where electronic equipment failed reliably. Within these zones, cameras lost power, sonar went blind, and autonomous probes drifted unresponsive, only to reboot minutes later with corrupted memories. These zones were not stationary. They tracked specific paths beneath the ice and formed corridors through the abyss before vanishing without residue. The lights were not simply glowing objects. They were moving electromagnetic voids, Attempts to measure these phenomena often led to impossible results. In 1997, a joint research team attempted to triangulate a ghost light using synchronized magnetometers placed kilometers apart. The plan failed immediately as the light passed through the array, causing atomic clocks to drift out of phase by milliseconds, a result that defies known physics. When the data was eventually reconstructed, the timestamps overlapped, suggesting the object had occupied multiple positions simultaneously. The report detailing these findings was quietly buried. The question of energy source remains equally baffling. No known power system could sustain such intense light emission, field manipulation, and silent propulsion at those depths without producing heat. Yet, thermal sensors detected no change in water temperature. Whatever powered the lights did not waste energy, it converted it perfectly. These lights never appeared above 700 meters, originating from depths that sonar pings suggested were far beyond Baikal's known bottom. These returns were inconsistent and stretched, as if something beneath the basin were distorting distance itself. The last confirmed ghost light event occurred during an unmanned winter survey, where cameras captured a disk moving slowly through the abyss. As it passed, two more lights emerged below it, aligning vertically in a stacked formation before descending together. During this transition, the magnetic field flattened completely. For 12 seconds, Lake Baikal became magnetically silent. Then, as quickly as it had begun, everything returned to normal and the lights were gone. No official explanation was ever issued. Ultimately, scientists do not avoid Lake Baikal's abyss because it is dangerous. They avoid it because it is occupied. Something moves there with intelligence, restraint, and a mastery over forces humanity barely understands. The ghost lights do not threaten, they demonstrate a presence. The lesson remains the same as the one delivered in 1982. Some depths are not merely unexplored, they are enforced. Chapter 5, Part 1. The methane rings and the boiling bottom. The first evidence of Lake Baikal's active nature did not come from the depths, but from orbit. In the early 2000s, Earth-observing satellites captured strange circular formations on the frozen surface. Perfect rings, some stretching several kilometers across, etched into the ice. These rings appeared darker than the surrounding surface, suggesting the ice was thinner, weaker, and warmer. Initially dismissed by analysts as compression errors or cloud interference, the rings continued to reappear in the same locations across different years. They were always found in winter, always over deep water in the central and northern basins, and always perfectly circular. Natural ice breakup is typically chaotic, shaped randomly by wind and currents, but the Baikal formations ignored every known rule of ice physics. These symmetrical, centered, and stable rings persisted for weeks or vanished overnight, with thermal imaging revealing that the water beneath them was measurably warmer than the surrounding lake. This heat source was not atmospheric, it originated from the abyss. When researchers finally reached a ring site in 2009, they found they could feel the subtle temperature anomaly in the air before even measuring it. At the center of these formations, the ice often fractured entirely to expose black, steaming water, signaling that the lake was breathing. Gas sensors deployed at these sites detected elevated concentrations of methane, rising in rhythmic bursts rather than diffuse plumes. While Lake Baikal sits atop vast deposits of methane hydrates, ice-like structures trapping gas under high pressure, their natural destabilization usually produces chaotic, scattered bubbles. Baikal's releases, however, were organized, periodic, and localized. This led to the chilling realization that something beneath the lake was venting gas deliberately. Submersible sonar scans at depths exceeding 1,200 meters revealed the boiling bottom, where sediment appeared agitated and in constant upward motion, creating invisible columns of gas that stretched from the lakebed to the ice. The most baffling aspect of this phenomenon was the lack of geological damage. Mass methane releases should trigger landslides or localized earthquakes, yet Baikal's boiling zones remained intact, with the methane being released without damaging its container. Furthermore, sonar maps showed that every ring corresponded exactly to a perfectly centered, perfectly cylindrical vertical column of gas. Nature does not produce vertical cylinders at such a scale. It appeared that the flow was being shaped. These events were also accompanied by the familiar electromagnetic anomalies seen with ghost lights. Magnetometers recorded localized distortions that tracked the columns, causing equipment to malfunction and clocks to drift. The implications of these methane releases are physically dangerous. In high concentrations, methane bubbles can reduce water density so drastically that ships lose buoyancy and sink without warning. This tool of the abyss became a grim reality in 2011 when two snowmobilers disappeared near a ring formation. Search teams found the ice fractured in a wide circular pattern where the methane had thinned it silently. Authorities labeled the incident a natural hazard, though they could not explain the geometry. Researchers later attempted to induce a release using seismic vibration equipment to understand the mechanism, but the lake did not respond, only for a new ring to appear 5 kilometers away days later, as if the abyss had chosen a different outlet. By the mid-2010s, an unspoken theory circulated that the abyss was ventilating itself. The methane hydrates were not failing. They were being tapped and moved through controlled channels for pressure control or environmental regulation. This engineered system became clear when researchers noticed that the methane rings overlapped spatially with ghost-like corridors and the silver swimmer encounter zones. During one winter satellite pass, all 3 layers responded simultaneously, a ring forming at the surface, a ghost light beneath the ice, and a simultaneous magnetic spike. The boiling bottom was not a warning or a sign of instability. It was a deliberate act of maintenance. Chapter 5, Part 2. The vertical scars. By the time the methane rings were accepted as real, the scientific inquiry had shifted from what they were to what caused them. Methane does not naturally organize into space-visible circles or rise in disciplined columns from a frozen abyss. It responds to force. This realization meant something massive and precise was acting on the bottom of Lake Baikal, something capable of disturbing kilometers of sediment repeatedly and with geometric discipline. The breakthrough came from reprocessing old sonar data, which revealed that beneath nearly every ring sat a perfectly aligned cylindrical disturbance. These were not craters or vents. They were shafts extending far below the known bottom of the lake, where sonar signals often vanished entirely. The boiling bottom was not an eruption, it was a penetration. This discovery complicated the settled fact of Baikal's 1,642-meter depth. Inconsistent sonar readings through these coordinates suggested depths hundreds of meters greater than the known maximum, where sound waves were scattered or absorbed. This was not mere acoustic interference, which is random. These were fixed spatial anomalies aligned with methane release patterns. Beneath the lakebed, something was interfering with distance itself. Furthermore, core samples showed that ancient, dense sediments were being methodically rearranged. There were no debris fields or explosive fragments, only an absence of material, as if something had passed through and taken the sediment with it. By the mid-2000s, methane was no longer viewed as the primary phenomenon, but as a tracer, the exhaust of an invisible passage. A vertical transit hypothesis began to circulate in closed research circles. Whatever operated beneath Baikal moved vertically between the deep earth and the water column. The cylindrical shape of these shafts implied containment and reinforcement. If gas were simply escaping, the walls would collapse into cones. Instead, these structures remained active and reinforced, operating at a scale and precision that defied biological or geological explanation. Researchers began to view the lake's various mysteries as a single, layered system. At 50 meters, witnesses saw humanoid, silver swimmers. At mid-depths, luminous disks appeared, and at the extreme depths, mechanical or energetic transit left geological scars. Yet, direct observation remained impossible. Every attempt to film or scan these vertical corridors resulted in total equipment failure, suggesting a bubble of exclusion or a denial of access rather than simple invisibility. This was punctuated by the 2008 ice break incident, where research ice fractured in a perfect arc matching the ring below, followed by a surge of methane that disrupted buoyancy. The lake was not just water, it was a barrier layer and a buffer. Ultimately, the methane rings represent pressure relief events, measured, contained, and regulated exhalations. If these releases were uncontrolled, the lake would be catastrophic. Instead, they are managed by whatever is moving between layers of the Earth. The grim consensus among those who study Baikal is that the rings are maintenance. The lake is not being exploited, it is being used as a functional transit corridor. Scientists do not avoid the abyss because it is unknown, but because it is occupied by an intelligent, controlled presence that does not tolerate intrusion. Every time humanity pushes downward, the abyss answers upward. Chapter 6, Part 1. The Dragon's Domain. By the end of Chapter 5, one fact had become unavoidable. Lake Baikal was not passive. The methane rings were not random geological accidents. They were patterned, regulated, and repeatable. Something beneath the lake moved with intent, disturbing the sediment and allowing gas to escape only within strict limits. This realization forced scientists to confront a problem they had avoided for decades. If the abyss was active, if something used it, then the lake was not just a natural feature. It was a controlled domain. Long before sonar, satellites, or methane sensors, the people who lived along Baikal shores already believed exactly that. For thousands of years, the Buryat people lived beside the lake, but they never described it as empty or wild. They described it as ruled. In Buryat mythology, Lake Baikal is a sovereign domain governed by a powerful entity known as the Water Dragon Master. This was not metaphor, poetry, or symbolism. It was jurisdiction. The dragon was not imagined as a creature swimming freely, but as a being dwelling deep below the surface in vast subterranean chambers connected by vertical passages. When the dragon moved, the lake responded. Water would churn without wind, ice would crack without temperature change, and gas would rise to form circles on the surface. Descriptions recorded centuries before methane rings were ever visible from space. At the heart of these beliefs stands Shaman Rock, a massive limestone outcrop near Alkan Island. It is revered not for its beauty, but for its danger, marking the boundary between the human world and the dragon's domain. For centuries, strict rules governed behavior near the rock. No loud noises, no metal struck against stone, and no blood spilled. Those who violated these taboos were said to vanish or trigger disasters. Buryat oral histories describe punishments that sound eerily familiar to modern data. Boats swallowed by calm water and sudden surges from below. These were not framed as accidents, but as corrections. When the dragon was disturbed, it did not attack randomly. It targeted the specific disturbance until the boundary was respected again. One of the most striking aspects of Buryat mythology is its verticality. The world was not divided into lands and seas, but into layers: the sky world, the human world, and the water/earth domains. The Water Dragon Master ruled upward and downward, controlling passage between these layers, which aligns uncomfortably well with the vertical corridors and movement modern researchers now observe. The mythology did not imagine a monster, it imagined a system. Shamans did not try to communicate with this system directly. They listened, reading vibrations in the ground and shifting sounds in the ice, believing the dragon announced its movements through signs like gas bubbles and fog long before it became visible. Certain parts of the lake, the central basin where silver swimmers were encountered and methane rings form, were strictly forbidden. The Buryat explanation was simple: those depths were passages, and passages were not places to linger. This belief in the keeper of the water persisted even into the Soviet era. While military planners initially dismissed these myths as superstition, their attitudes shifted after the incidents of 1982. Internal memos show that training routes and dive plans were quietly altered to avoid specific zones, matching the old taboos exactly. No official document referenced a dragon, but the patterns of avoidance were identical. Ultimately, the methane rings fit the role of a keeper disturbingly well. They release pressure and prevent catastrophic buildup, acting as maintenance rather than destruction. Scientists usually separate myth from measurement. But Baikal's myths describe behavior, vertical movement, controlled disturbances, and enforced boundaries that matches observed data too closely to ignore. The dragon does not hunt or expand. It reacts only when the balance is threatened. To the Buriat people, the lake existed in a state of order that humans disrupted at their peril. If the myths are not metaphors and the boundaries are real, the next question is unavoidable. What is the dragon guarding? Chapter 6, Part 2. The Dragon's Domain, continued. The idea that the dragon was guarding something was not new, but modern instruments are beginning to point to the same conclusion reached by Buriat shamans centuries earlier, not through belief, but through avoidance. When researchers overlaid methane ring locations with restricted zones used by Soviet-era naval planners, an uncomfortable overlap appeared. The same regions avoided by submarines were the same depths never fully mapped, and the same coordinates Buriat oral tradition warned against. These areas were not randomly dangerous. They were consistently and vertically unstable, defined by pressure anomalies, temperature inversions, and sudden upwellings. The lake was not just deep in these coordinates. It was active. Buriat mythology never describes the water dragon master in biological terms. It does not eat, breed, or die. Instead, it governs. Modern researchers struggling to classify Baikal's anomalies have begun using a term that echoes the myth far more than intended: a self-regulating deepwater system. This system releases methane before pressure reaches destructive levels, shifts sediment without collapsing basin walls, and reacts to intrusion with localized disturbances. This is not the behavior of an animal, it is the behavior of infrastructure. This aligns with the boiling bottom, a term the Buriats translated as the restless floor. It is not violent or explosive, but constantly adjusting. Beneath the lake, the earth moves slowly, creeping, flexing, and exhaling. In this context, the methane rings are not eruptions, they are breaths. One detail in the mythology stands out. The dragon is never described as visible. There are no accounts of scales, wings, or eyes. Instead, it is known only by its effects, such as water movement, sound, pressure, and disappearance. This absence matters, as ancient cultures were meticulous about visual details. If the dragon exists as presence without form, it functions exactly like a mechanism. Even Shaman Rock was not worshipped as the dragon itself, but treated as an interface, a point of contact where the layers of the world were thin. Geologically, the rock sits atop a fault system where acoustic tests show unusual resonance, acting as a natural amplifier. Shamans described this as the dragon listening. During the late Soviet period, a series of unmapped incidents during deep-water tests, equipment malfunctions, navigation failures, and impossible sonar readings led to a quiet change in policy. Certain depths became off-limits and data vanished into archives. The pattern mirrored mythology exactly: intrusion, response, and withdrawal. Critically, the system never escalates beyond what is necessary. Disturbances occur only near the point of intrusion, functioning as a proportional defense. Methane rings appear primarily above fault intersections and near vertical conduits beneath historically forbidden zones. In Buriat myth, these are the dragon's doors, not exits, but controlled openings. Submersibles passing beneath active methane rings report a haunting mechanical silence. There is no biological noise or signs of life, as though the lakebed has been cleared intentionally. While Western storytelling turns dragons into hoarders of treasure, the Buriat dragon guards balance. The lake contains 1/5 of the world's unfrozen freshwater, and a catastrophic collapse would devastate ecosystems far beyond Siberia. If a system evolved to prevent that outcome, its actions would look exactly like what we see: pressure management and boundary enforcement. Whether natural or constructed, this system is ancient, older than human presence, and perhaps older than the lake's current. T-shape. In recent decades, disturbances have increased alongside drilling and sonar activity. The dragon's responses have become more frequent, suggesting a system under strain, working harder to maintain balance as intrusion increases. Shamans warned that constant disturbance would wake the dragon. Scientists would call it system overload. If the system fails, Baikal would not explode, but destabilize, leading to an uncontrolled shift that the Guardian could no longer correct. Even today, locals avoid certain areas and lower their voices near Shaman Rock, a behavior that has outlived empires because it works. The final alignment is undeniable. What mythology calls the dragon, science calls a self-regulating deep earth system. Different languages are being used to describe the same observations of localized anomaly responses in unstable, forbidden zones. The greatest danger is not what lies beneath the lake, but humanity's refusal to listen. The Bariat people never tried to conquer Baikal. They learned it, surviving alongside something vast and patient. The dragon does not demand belief, only respect. Chapter 7 Part 1. The final descent, deep sleep, atmospheric immersion. By the time the proposal was written, most scientists already knew the answer would be no. Lake Baikal had resisted every method of deep exploration attempted so far. Remotely operated vehicles failed, tethered submersibles lost signal, and crude dives ended in medical emergencies, hallucinations, or abrupt aborts caused by unexplained pressure effects. The problem was not depth alone, it was exposure. Every method used until now forced the human body to confront Baikal all at once: pressure, temperature, acoustic distortion, and electromagnetic interference, without adaptation. The lake did not behave like the ocean. Its depth was vertical, narrow, enclosed, and alive with movement from below. So the final proposal suggested something radically different. Instead of fighting the environment, the body would be introduced to it slowly. The technique was officially called deep sleep atmospheric immersion, though among researchers it earned a simpler name: the descent sleep. The idea originated from high-altitude medicine and deep space analog studies, where gradual exposure paired with induced hypometabolic states reduced shock, hallucination, and physiological collapse. Rather than sending a conscious diver down into Baikal's abyss, the subject would be sedated into a controlled, low-activity state. Breathing, heart rate, and neural activity would be slowed so the body would not resist the environment, it would drift into it. Pressure would increase not over minutes, but over hours. Temperature changes would be smoothed, and sound would be filtered. The lake would be encountered as a gradient, not a boundary. No one pretended this was safe. Deep sleep immersion had never been attempted in a freshwater abyss because, unlike the ocean, Baikal's pressure profile is unpredictable. Thermal layers fold back on themselves, acoustic waves refract upward instead of dispersing, and there were the unknowns of methane concentrations, vertical currents, localized pressure pockets, and magnetic distortions. If something went wrong, the subject would not be conscious enough to respond. That was the point, and also the danger. The descent was not aimed at the deepest point of Lake Baikal, a fact that alone should have raised alarms. Instead, the target was a zone slightly above maximum depth, an area repeatedly flagged in past data as nonlinear. Pressure readings there did not match depth models, and instruments behaved as if the water column had folded in on itself. Earlier expeditions had labeled it unstable and moved on, but this mission did not. The immersion capsule was not a submersible in the traditional sense. It had no propulsion, no windows, and no external lights. It was designed to be quiet, suspended from a variable-length fiber tether and descending at less than 1 meter per minute. The outer shell was layered with acoustic dampening to prevent resonance with Baikal's internal sound channels. Inside, the subject lay supine, surrounded by a breathable helium-oxygen mix adjusted dynamically to pressure changes. There would be no sudden transitions, only sinking. The decision to install no cameras confused many observers, but the answer was physiological. Previous dives had shown that visual input at extreme depth triggered severe neurological stress as the brain attempted to reconcile movement with distorted light, shifting shadows, and impossible spatial cues. The subject would not see the descent, they would feel it, while the brain was kept just below the threshold of conscious interpretation. Only one person volunteered because only one met the criteria. extensive deep-sea experience, prior exposure to hypobaric and hyperbaric environments, and demonstrated resistance to sensory deprivation. Most importantly, they had previously been to Baikal surface zones where disturbances were strongest. They had felt the pressure headaches, the humming, and the sense of being observed without direction. When asked why they volunteered, the subject gave a short answer: because it feels unfinished. The capsule entered the water before dawn with no ceremony. The lake was calm, unnaturally so, as if the water were holding its breath. Sedation began immediately. Heart rate slowed, respiration dropped, and neural activity entered a controlled delta wave pattern as the capsule began to sink. The first 300 meters were expectedly normal, and the subject's vitals remained steady as brain activity dipped deeper into sleep. So far, the model held. At approximately 420 meters, the first anomaly appeared when external pressure sensors registered a brief plateau, as if the capsule had stopped descending despite continued tether payout, before pressure resumed increasing. This exact phenomenon had been recorded before, always briefly and always ignored, but seeing it in real time made it harder to dismiss. The lake had layers, but not all of them followed gravity. The capsule compensated automatically as the gas mix shifted and acoustic filters recalibrated. Inside, the subject remained still, but neural patterns became more regular and synchronized. At 610 meters, the hydrophones detected low-frequency oscillations, not noise, but a rhythm too consistent and evenly spaced to be biological or geological. The subject's EEG shifted sideways into patterns associated with deep meditation and lucid dreaming. This was not part of the plan. The subject was not supposed to be aware, yet neural markers suggested structured internal imagery. Researchers debated whether to abort, but they didn't. The subject's vitals were at 900 meters. The descent slowed automatically as the capsule system struggled to reconcile depth readings with pressure data. According to pressure, the capsule should have been deeper. According to the tether, it should not. The lake was compressing space, or at least behaving as if it were. For the first time, muscle activity appeared in the subject, a slight movement of the hands, then stillness. Audio monitors picked up a change in breathing rhythm that was slower than programmed, suggesting an adjustment rather than distress. The subject's body was responding before the systems did. At 1,200 meters, all external sound vanished into a zone of acoustic null. There were no echoes, no background noise, and no movement detected. The capsule was alone, and yet pressure readings fluctuated subtly, as if something massive were moving nearby without displacing water in the usual way. Mission protocols required termination at the first sign of such an anomaly, but the command team hesitated. The subject's vitals were perfect, better than perfect, with a heart rate stabilized at a level seen in elite free divers and brain activity, showing coherence rarely achieved even in trained monks. The subject was not being harmed, they were adapting. The command team allowed the descent to continue. For the first time, a human body was not resisting Baikal's abyss. It was synchronizing with it through surrender rather than technology. That realization frightened the observers more than any equipment failure ever had. Because if the lake could be entered this way, then it could also be entered by something else. Chapter 7 Part 2. The final descent Part 2. Entering the abyss by 1,400 meters. The capsule had passed the known bounds of Baikal's central basin. Here, the lake's walls close and slightly, forming a subtle funnel shape that deflects vertical currents in unpredictable ways. All previous expeditions had reported pressure anomalies in this zone, but nothing prepared the team for what followed. The capsule's instruments began to register faint fluctuations in gravitational readings. These were minuscule, barely detectable, but consistent. Something massive lay below, moving slowly, just out of reach of sonar. The lake no longer behaved like a column of water. It behaved like a medium, a viscous layer that shifted with an unseen force. Inside, the subject remained in deep sleep immersion. Sedation ensured unconsciousness, yet neural monitors revealed a paradoxical state. Brain waves displayed heightened coherence. patterns associated with altered awareness, but without stress. The body, exposed to unprecedented pressure, adjusted seamlessly. For the observers above, this was both triumph and terror. Triumph, because the subject had survived a depth no one had ever reached consciously. Terror, because the readings suggested the abyss itself had been interacting with the subject, not as an inert environment, but as an active presence. Sensory impressions from within the subject's EEG and micro-EMG sensors indicated subtle muscle activations synchronized with the lake's anomalies. Researchers postulated that the body was responding to pressure waves imperceptible to instruments. Movements were minute, almost imperceptible, a flex of the hand, a micro-adjustment in posture, but they were regular, patterned, and anticipatory. It was as though the lake itself was guiding the body, not violently, not aggressively, but directing, shaping, and testing. At this depth, the familiar rules of physics seemed to bend slightly. Tether tension varied independently of descent rate. Minor fluctuations in water density caused the capsule to drift laterally against expectations. Instruments repeatedly measured phantom layers, pressure zones that existed where the lake should have been uniform. Every signal indicated one thing: the abyss was alive, in the sense that it was dynamic, responsive, and intelligent. Crossing into the nonlinear zone by 1,520 meters, the capsule entered the area scientists had previously labeled the nonlinear zone. Here, methane plumes rose in tight cylinders, echoing the formations visible from satellites. Previous ROV and manned attempts had failed to remain stable here. Now, the capsule hovered gently. Pressure compensators activated automatically, stabilizing external forces, but anomalies persisted. The magnetic compass rotated erratically. Acoustic sensors ceased returning coherent echoes. Instruments indicated vertical displacements inconsistent with tether length and apparent folding of space. The subject's physiology continued to adapt. Micromovements synchronized with these anomalies, suggesting unconscious environmental sampling. Cardiac and neural activity showed patterns of heightened efficiency, akin to deep meditation or hypnagogic states. The presence at 1,550 meters, subtle phenomena became more pronounced. External sensors recorded energy fluctuations inconsistent with normal lake behavior. Magnetic field distortions shifted in rhythmic pulses. Acoustic sensors intermittently registered low-frequency tones, unstructured, yet patterned enough to suggest intentional modulation. Observers on the surface could only infer the source. The movement appeared massive, far exceeding the scale of any known animal, ROV, or geological process. Yet nothing approached the capsule. There were no collisions, no direct currents, only a presence, a shaping force that left signatures without contact. Inside, the subject's brain waves suggested immersion in a synthetic-like environment. Patterns resembled slow-motion sensory processing, recognition of structure without form, awareness of motion without visual input, comprehension of scale without sight. Vertical corridors and methane shafts. As the capsule descended further, methane concentrations increased slightly. Plumes observed in previous missions were here, marking vertical corridors in the sediment. Instruments confirmed that the columns were cylindrical, coherent, and consistent with satellite-observed methane rings. The subject remained unaffected physically, though EEG readings suggested subconscious processing of vertical vectors. Researchers theorized the brain was detecting micropressure gradients, perhaps related to methane passage or underlying geological structures. The correlation was striking. The vertical shafts previously studied were now confirmed as structural features extending deep into the sediment. Whatever had formed them, the dragon's domain described by Barriot tradition, was not a surface-level phenomenon. It reached kilometers below. Interaction without contact by 1,580 meters, subtle environmental changes increased. The capsule drifted laterally without tether input. Micropressure differentials suggested corridors below were active, perhaps flowing or pulsing with energy. This was the first point at which researchers began to question whether the capsule's movement was entirely passive. Did the lake itself control drift? Did it assess the presence of a human body within it? The answer remained uncertain. But the coincidence of vessel stability, methane plume alignment, and subject physiological synchronization suggested some form of active environmental mediation. The deepest recorded point at 1,600 meters, the maximum recorded depth, the capsule's sensors entered uncharted territory. The pressure readings became difficult to interpret. Magnetic anomalies approached extremes, disrupting instrumentation. Acoustic signals from above were delayed, distorted, or blocked entirely. The subject's body showed remarkable resilience. Heart rate, respiration, and neural coherence remained stable. Micromovements within the capsule continued to reflect subtle interactions with the surrounding medium. At this depth, the lake's sediment, methane, and water column appeared to behave as a single system. The lines between fluid, solid, and gas blurred. The capsule was not simply in water. It was within a dynamic structure extending from deep earth through the sediment into the abyssal water column. Final observations. The final descent revealed several critical insights. Vertical immersion works. Deep sleep immersion allowed human physiology to withstand pressures previously deemed unsurvivable. Gradual adaptation was key. The abyss is active. Sensors and subject responses confirm that Baikal's deepest zone is not static. It exhibits rhythmic, intelligent, or system-like behavior. Methane shafts are functional. Vertical methane corridors are coherent, repeating structures, likely related to sediment displacement and energy transmission. The dragon concept is real, functionally. The combination of vertical corridors, active sediment, and environmental regulation aligns closely with Buriat mythology's water dragon master. The system behaves as if enforcing boundaries. Observational denial exists. Instrumentation at extreme depth fails in consistent ways, suggesting the abyss itself inhibits observation beyond a certain threshold. Returning to the surface, the ascent was slow, controlled, and uneventful. Physiological readings normalized gradually. Neural activity returned to baseline consciousness without incident. Yet the experience left a profound impact on both the subject and the observing team. Patterns observed during deep sleep immersion could not be reconciled with classical geology, biology, or hydrodynamics. They suggested the presence of an ancient, self-regulating system, capable of vertical control, environmental adaptation, and selective interaction. Implications. The final descent answered some questions, but posed even larger ones. What maintains the system beneath Baikal? How long has it existed? Are other lakes or rifts governed by similar systems? And most urgently, what are the consequences if humans continue to intrude without understanding? The mission demonstrated that the abyss could be entered, but only under extreme caution and profound respect for the environment's natural constraints. Any attempt at conventional exploration would almost certainly trigger unpredictable responses, mechanical, chemical, or even energetic. Final thoughts. For centuries, humans have sought to dominate nature. Lake Baikal resists that impulse. The final descent confirmed what Buriat shamans and early explorers knew. This is not a passive environment. It is a domain with rules, boundaries, and self-regulating mechanisms beyond current human comprehension. The deepest layers of the lake, 1,600 meters of water, sediment, and mystery, are not empty. They are functional, alive in a systemic sense, and they will not tolerate intrusion without consequence. The final descent did not conquer the abyss. It illuminated it, momentarily, without changing it. The lake exhaled gently. Methane rings, vertical shafts, and subtle pressure flows resumed their patterns. The dragon, system, guardian, presence remained undisturbed. Humans had glimpsed it, briefly, and learned the most important lesson of all. Some domains are not ours to claim. Lake Baikal keeps its deepest secrets well, and for now, the abyss remains sovereign.